Alright, I recorded this video actually on Sunday before the men's semifinals, and admittedly it was quite knee-jerk after, a wind-plagued quarterfinal day I was in attendance for, where the quality of tennis was so scratchy. Obviously, when this video goes up, I hope day after the Cincinnati final, I think most of it still aged fine. But some of it was flipped, especially on the part of Jannik Sinner, who looked a whole lot more clean despite still not appearing to be 100% in his last two matches. And in general, those are two terrific semifinals with Holger, Foe, and Sasha and Jannik, not just for the dramatics, obviously, but two also very clean matches. But that's all I gotta say in post. I hope you enjoyed the video. Peace. Alright, you guys, so if you've been around this channel for a while, you know that around every August, I parade around the fact that this is my favorite time of the tennis calendar, and, it shouldn't be hard to understand why. I am a Mason, Ohio native. That tournament is literally in my backyard, more or less, and I've been going there every year save one since 2009. So, it goes without saying, some of my favorite memories, especially in the infancy phase of my tennis fandom, have taken shape there, and literally every year, even on some of the more lackluster years of lineups, nonetheless, it's always great vibes there, that is guaranteed, and couple that with, my first key core memory being Rafa's US Open 2010 run, my love for this time of the year has, a lot of sentimental value tied to it. So I can acknowledge that while also saying I'm no stranger to bad tennis this time of year. Already at this point, the long, grueling tennis calendar's effects are settling in. We're 3 of the 4 majors down. A lot of people are already, trying to find reserves at this point. Iga Swiatek kind of alluded to that yesterday after her quarterfinal match. And that's been going on a while. That's not an era thing, that was going on even during peak Big 3 golden era quote-unquote times. And that effect, is of course amplified in it being an Olympics year. It's nothing new. There's plenty of data, there's plenty of stats, it's well known nobody's defended their US Open title in over 15 years now. You look at the men, it's so rare to do, the Canada-Cincinnati double, let alone, going on to win all 3 with the US Open as well. I think only 3 men in history have ever done it. And lately, with the Big 3 stranglehold on Masters pretty much non-existent now, we're pretty far removed from it. It's only been Djokovic winning them for the last 3 years or so. You've seen some guys who, have had some truly spectacular runs if you saw them. Ina Papirin at Montreal this year beat a lot of good players. PCB did the same, played some real quality ball to win Montreal in 2022, and Coric as well in 2024 played out of his mind. Even, trying to nitpick them, those are all very good runs, but history books probably remember them as, Masters winners that aren't like the others. Albeit in recent years, if you get hot, it's become a lot more wide open to get your hands on one of these Masters 1000s. And like I'm saying, the North American swing has been no stranger to that as well the last couple of years. But, maybe this is a little bit knee-jerk. As somebody that was in the stands yesterday for Rublev Sinner, that was truly ghastly. I mean, I know wind played a factor, and there always is a reason behind it. And they certainly were really tough conditions to play in, but just with the level in Cincinnati not being particularly high this year, and I suppose court conditions also being unique this year in the fact that they've sped Cincinnati back up and they're attempting to make the US Open mimic it with the CPI court pace index being over 40. I think it was around 42. I think this is a great time to take stock actually with the state of affairs, the tennis calendar, all of that. So in a way, heading into this U.S. Open, I do think we're sort of in a similar spot that we were heading into Roland Garros. Clay's season this year was compromised by a lot of injuries at the top. And if you swap out injuries with just low fuel tanks and guys not really looking to be at 100%, you look at Jannik Sinner and I don't know, you'd have to say illness has kind of taken its toll and slowed his momentum, where he hasn't been able to stay on court a long time to really get in a rhythm. Really going back to end of Miami, maybe early clay court season. I know he built up some traction ahead of Wimbledon as well, but that also ended in Jannik Sinner not feeling at 100% physically. And as a result, these hardcourt events in Canada and Cincinnati so far, he's looked as vulnerable as he has all year. Even though he was dealing with the same type of ailments throughout clay, grass, whatever the case may be, he never looked this vulnerable. He has looked super scratchy throughout both these events. Still finds himself in the semifinals of Cincinnati, so there's a chance for that to change. And I'm sure he would love to get to 100% because on paper, these slick conditions, these slick court conditions, he's a player that would really benefit from them. He's a guy that, at his best, it's probably him and Djokovic up top on these type of conditions right now. But he is still a ways away from that. He has continued to live to fight another day in Cincinnati, so there is room for that to change. And if it does, obviously you look for him to be super dangerous in New York. Carlos Alcaraz, on the other hand, so far in his career, he's probably been his most vulnerable on these types of really quick hard courts. To be fair, he did win a U.S. Open after they, sped it back up at least a little bit after the years in I think like 2016 through 2019 where it was super, super slow. But whatever the case, his one showing after the Olympics, by his own admission in Cincinnati, was probably the worst match of his career. And watching it, you'd be hard-pressed to disagree. I mean, Alcaraz is a guy to this point who has operated on a lot of pits and valleys. And even amongst those valleys, that was probably the lowest of the low, his match against Monfils. I mean, he just could not really find the court at times, especially on the restart the next day because the match was interrupted by a rain delay. And along with not being the most comfortable in these conditions, Alcaraz has the potential now to go into the U.S. Open the 4 seed. He had a chance, I think, with 2 match wins, he would have locked down the 2 seed. With Novak Djokovic having missed Cincinnati, an event he won last year, so 1,000 points dropping for him. For Alcaraz's purposes, I think getting the 2 seed would have been the bigger deal than dropping to 4 potentially if Zverev's able to win the event, which is certainly on the table. But as far as just he is concerned heading into the U.S. Open, I still don't waver that much with him because that match, for one, was so bad. He's damn near 100% assured to be much better at the U.S. Open. I think we all understand Alcaraz in best of 5 is different gravy as well. It's not like I don't think Alcaraz can excel on these conditions. I mean, the guy still, even in Turin, where he vocalized that he was uncomfortable, he still made the semifinals. The first time of asking of playing that event, and I think his loss to Monfils again was so bad, I think you can pretty much chalk it up as an anomaly. I just think the thing with him on the surface is gonna come down to the serve. As we've seen, conditions like this do favor the guys that are getting more cheap points with their serves. And as I said at the Olympics, I thought, Alcaraz's serve, I think there has been progress there within these last couple of months, having tweaked his motion a little bit. It's just on a court like that, the biggest thing for him is there's not going to be as much margin for error to get away with the streakiness if your opponent is getting more free points than you consistently. But it's still going to be best of 5, and whatever seed he is, I still expect him to be there at the back end in the last four. And just touching on Novak Djokovic, everything is optics, right? I mean, even after those Olympics, you probably wouldn't have proclaimed Djokovic the favorite going into the US Open, but considering how poorly played a lot of the tennis has been from the top guys in the North American hardcourt swing, and Novak, just by virtue of sitting it out, enjoying the well-earned rewards in Serbia from his Olympic gold medal victory, he low-key might have just elevated to that very position just because how good he was the last time we saw him play. We'll see how he deals with the change in surface and no match play heading into the Open. But being who he is, he's been around a while. I'm sure he'll take all the measures he can to be ready as best he can by the US Open. We can talk motivation of what else is there left to win now that he's won the Olympic gold, and the answer is nothing. But the fact that he's still intending on playing these events, he's obviously playing to win. And obviously he's right there by default. He is in that tier 1. No reason to think he won't be live to win that title as well. And then you've got Zverev, who again could, and I think will, go into the US Open, the 2 seed. I do see that scenario playing out. I think he's playing better than Sinner, albeit he's not exactly lighting the world on fire right now, but I do think he wins Cincinnati. We'll see if that plays out, but obviously he's put together an incredibly solid year. The won Masters again in Rome, Roland Garros final, and he's just been so consistent in like every event he's played. It's why he's in a position where he can take the 2 seed. That's a guy you don't really worry about with fatigue. He's another guy that would be really helped by these court conditions. He has excelled on indoor hard courts throughout his career. It's no secret why, with that serve and that combination of defense, power. But we're pretty much in the same spot with him. I think you kind of know what you're going to get. Unlike in the early years of his career, he's not as prone to these upsets, even though you can catch him on one of these off days, and he's still prone to the early round 5-setter with someone he shouldn't be going 5 with. But this is where he's going to be measured, as these majors moving forward. He has put together a resume at this point that is that of the greatest player to never win a Grand Slam. And, you know, he's typically, again, going to be deep into these slam tournaments. He can beat anybody, but at this point, there's no reason to think otherwise that he will. Particularly when the window of opportunity to actually win one of these things opens up and he actually has a chance to grab it. That's where he has wilted a little bit. Against the best of the best, you expect him to take them to a very grindy 4 or 5 sets. He'll have his chances, and that's the case pretty much everywhere but grass. It remains to be seen whether he can buck that trend. And then it's really weird to talk about Daniil Medvedev heading into the US Open as not a top 4 seed or player, but that is where we are. Not only that, but the stretch that early in his career, once he broke through in 2019, in fact, when he broke through in 2019, it was this stretch that really put him on the map, was that summer of 2019 on the hard courts. And through 2021, he lived up to that reputation. This was where his bread was buttered, was during the North American hardcourt swing. He's the best player over that stretch. But since then, quietly, he has seemed to have lost his touch, with the exception of last year's US Open, where he put in, arguably a career-best performance in the semis against Alcaraz. But I don't know what's been up with him, during this stretch since. I know 22, there was a litany of issues physically, mentally, that he dealt with throughout the year. Last year, almost all year, he was very, very good, but for some reason, underwhelmed for him during these events. And this year, it's completely nosedived. I mean, 2 one-and-done exits in Canada and Cincinnati. One to Davidovich Fokina, who was having a disastrous year, and the other to a Yuri Lehechka who had not played in a really long time, but to be fair, didn't take him long to get back on track. But with Daniil, it's kind of weird. Over the last year, as in going back to this time a year ago, he's sort of turned into something of a slam merchant. He hasn't won a title since then, and his results bookending these slams have really been lackluster. But he's still found a way to put in some really good slam showings, with the exception of the French Open this year. He's a guy that's still in his physical prime, and again, of late, his track record in best of 5 has dwarfed that of his best of 3 record. But it's definitely going to be weird to see no top 4 seed for him this US Open. And I don't know, there's just some weird juju around Medvedev right now. And elsewhere, I don't know, is there anybody right now who's really, surging? A lot of the Americans that typically do well this time of year, not so much in 2024. I think the one exception is Francis Tiafoe. He's up to his usual fun and games on U.S. soil, making the semis in Cincinnati. Tommy Paul, after, such a sparkling last year or two on hardcourt, seemed like he was totally out of sorts off a quick turnaround from the Olympics, where he participated in dubs and singles and went deep in singles as well. Similar story with Taylor Fritz. Nice little stretch for Seb Korda as well. I think he sort of continues to just blow hot and cold. Ben Shelton got back on track as well, I think, in Cincinnati. A good showing from him this week. I think he's your wild card with the most potential upside there of those guys. So an important week to come out of Cincinnati feeling good, and I think he should. Holger Rune's week in Cincinnati definitely deserves some note. A semifinal run with a couple of performances, clinical performances, just what the doctor ordered. And I think just by virtue of making it this far this tournament, it becomes his best ever performance at this time during the season. Traditionally, these last couple of years, it really seems like he's struggled with the elements this time of year, the oppression of the heat, combined with how muggy, humid it can get. Obviously coupled with already being 8 months through the grueling tennis calendar. It just hasn't been a recipe for success for Holger, but in a year that overall has been disappointing for him to this point, he's seen his ranking drop. His success here definitely should give him some belief for a chance coming up to really salvage the season. Even in an overall disappointing year, there is the silver lining that his body seems to be holding up a lot better this season. I can't remember, really any matches that I thought he physically broke down as the reason for him losing them. You look elsewhere, Ruud, Dimitrov seemed to have cooled off a little bit. De Minaur injured. Hurkacz, somebody that would have loved these conditions, injured as well. Re-injured, rather. In his outing in Cincinnati, even though he was able to get a couple matches back under the belt. Tsitsipas, you can't really do much worse than he has at the Open throughout his career, so the bar's not high there, but he's also just continued in this stretch of regression for him. And yeah, things are looking murky elsewhere, really. Honestly, the one guy, the closest person I would say to having, sort of a surging North American hardcourt swing is Andrei Rublev, to be honest. Shout out to Rublev, taking some time to get back into a better headspace. I know that incident, that default in Dubai, really seemed to wreak havoc on his season, as he was really in a tailspin there for a couple of months. Not just in the results, but, it's been covered ad nauseum. His composure was just shot to pieces after that. So it's good to see him just in a better headspace and certainly playing much better, getting the win on Sinner in Canada, making the final there. I believe he went deep in DC as well, and then playing Sinner tight in that aforementioned Cincinnati quarterfinal yesterday. And even that, albeit some really good results, very, very consistent, back to Andrei Rublev's norm. That feels like a surge more so on account of the stretch that Rublev was coming off of, rather than him seeming like he's red hot heading into the Open or something like that. we're also at a place where we were, going into Roland Garros, where despite all this uncertainty and, people are probably going to say it's wide open again, and the US Open has been the most wide open major for the better part of this century. Of course, particularly since the Big Four took over. But we're in a similar place where I still feel the same way that I think most of us did heading into Roland Garros, where you would still be surprised if it weren't one of the top four, in this case 5 guys, because of Medvedev's track history at this event, being the ones to determine who walks away with the hardware in Flushing Meadows. Even with this extra wrinkle of the Olympics seemingly accelerating the typical post-US Open burnout to even before it. So I don't know, with that extra factor, it should be extra interesting to see how things pan out to end Cincinnati, and then of course at the year's last major coming up here in a little over a week. Should be a lot of fun, particularly these last couple matches in Cincinnati, a couple of marquee matches on the men's side. Maybe we have a clearer picture after this event, but until then, that'll do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it'd be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.